Michelle Tomasic, which is here from Boston, from the MIT. We are glad and excited with your seminar. So I'm going to introduce her with a very brief bio. I must confess that she has an enormous CV, but she has asked me to just a short introduction, because otherwise we will be here 45 minutes speaking of all the things she has done. So here we go. Michelle Tomasic started teaching at MIT as a teaching assistant while doing her PhD in physics, and she loved it so much that she hasn't left. In 2015, she was hired to make online physics classes available for everyone around the world, as well as teaching introductory physics in the classroom. Today, she's managed the MIT Physics Residential and Online Learning Lab, a group tasked with creating teaching and improving courses both online and on campus. So, well, I think it's very short, but we can feel she's passionate. What do you think with all the things she do in her academic career? So thank you very much, Michelle. It's your turn, and we are going to be unmute every one of us, and please, we can start.
All right. Thank you so much. That was a very, very, very kind introduction, and I'm really excited to see everybody here and to share some of these ideas and actually to get feedback and hear what you're thinking about these ideas too. So can everybody see my screen? Okay, the slides I'm sharing. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about belonging and metacognition in introductory physics. So I'll actually start by sort of talking about some of the big picture ideas, and then I will talk about how we apply those ideas to our individual classes, to our introductory classes at MIT. So actually, even before I get there, let me see. So as Sonia said, I'm in the physics department. And when you hear the word physics, a lot of people, what's the first reaction when you hear the word physics? So a lot of people, at least in my context here in the United States, a lot of people will say Einstein. A lot of people will say really confusing equations on a blackboard, and that's sort of their impression of physics, right? And when I run into people not on MIT's campus and I tell them that I teach physics, the most common response is, "Oh, that's too hard. I could never do that." And I find that very, very frustrating response. But actually, I think it's good for me to hear that over and over again, because it reminds me that many of the students coming into my class for the first time feel that same way. And so actually, it reminds me also that there was a time that I felt that way as well. So in my very first mechanics class in college, I was, completely intimidated by all of the people in my class. They were from fancy private schools that I had never heard of. They were all taking the advanced math class that I didn't get into because I didn't have enough preparation. There was even a girl who was the daughter of an astronaut. I felt completely out of my league. I felt like, they were all way smarter than I was, and I was not going to be able to do it. And then when I opened my problem set the night before the problem set was due, I just stared at the problems and felt like I could not do it. I had no idea how to even get started. And I just was flailing. I was miserable. I thought to myself, I just can't do physics. I can't do this. I'm not smart enough. But I was really lucky in that the other people in my class were very kind and inclusive, and they asked me to join them for problem set study sessions. And they started the problem set the day it was given rather than the day before it was due. And they had questions too, and they didn't know how to start, but they went to office hours and they did all these things that were seeking out help, and they were including me, and they made me feel like I could do it. And now I teach physics at MIT. So from that beginning of feeling like this was not something I would ever be able to do, now I teach this subject to my students. So this is actually a story that I tell my students on the first day of class, because I think it's really important to acknowledge to students that it's actually really common to have these feelings, especially in these, the classes that are considered hard, right? Physics, math kind of classes. It's really common to feel like you are the only one who's struggling. You are the only one who's not cut out for it, and everybody else knows what they're doing. And I think it's really important for students to realize that a lot of people feel that way, and that it's really important to ask for help rather than just giving up and floundering. And so this is actually a part of a belonging intervention that we do in our physics class. It's actually based on an intervention that Chandrika Singh and her group at the University of Pittsburgh have been working on. We are still tweaking it to try to get it right, to be influential for our students. But I do think it's been so influential for our teaching staff that we have adopted it, and we're still tweaking on it. But let me take a step back now and tell you why belonging is something that we care about so much. So for me, I think thinking about belonging, it's sort of, depending on whether you start feeling out like you belong or you don't belong, it either sets you to this sort of positive feedback loop or negative feedback loop, right? So if you feel like you belong there, if you're a student, you feel like you belong in the class, you're more likely to do things like engage with your peers, or go up to office hours, or ask the professor for help, or ask a TA for help, right? And that means you're going to learn the material better, and you're going to feel a sense of community in the classroom, which means you have positive feedback. You'll get positive feedback from that class experience, right? You'll get good grades on the test. You'll have friends in the class. You'll enjoy the experience of going to class. And that will make you, again, feel even more like you belong there, right? So that reinforces that. It's sort of a reinforcing cycle. On the other side of things, if you start out feeling like you don't belong in the classroom, you're not going to do things like really engage with your peers in the classroom. You're not going to go seek out extra help from TAs or the professor. And you're therefore not going to learn the material as well. You won't feel like class is a fun experience. You'll feel lonely in class, and you probably won't do as well on the exams. And so that, again, reinforces this feeling of not belonging, right? And so, I mean, I can personally very much attest to feeling that the first couple of weeks of that semester, back when I was a first-year student in college, I just felt like I did not belong, and it really did make me disengage until somebody, really did manage to pull me in and pull me over to the belonging side. So as much as we can, I want to sort of bring our students over to the belonging side so that they will engage more, and that they'll succeed in the class. So I'm going to talk about two other sort of big picture ideas like this before I explain our class a little more. So the next thing I want to tell you a little bit about is the idea of growth mindset. So this is an idea from Carol Dweck. She sort of started this work, and a lot of people have adopted this and started thinking about this. And everybody really is on some sort of spectrum between having a fixed and a growth mindset, and you might have a growth mindset about one thing and a fixed mindset about something else. But I'm going to sort of present this as very polarized, as very black and white, just to sort of help present the ideas. With the caveat that everybody is really somewhere on this sort of spectrum. It's not really as drastic as I'm presenting. But so let me sort of give you a table. I'm going to walk through each of these slowly, so don't try to read the whole thing at once. But so to give you an idea of what I mean by a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, let's go through these different categories. So somebody who has a fixed mindset sort of has this belief that you're either naturally good at something or you're not, right? So if you have to expend effort on something, that is a sign of weakness. It's a sign that you're not good at this, and therefore maybe you should give up, right? And versus if you have a growth mindset, you recognize that everybody needs to expend effort to learn anything, and you actually see effort as an important component of your learning for something. I think one of the big differences between the growth and the fixed mindset is goal setting. So often people who are fixed mindset on something tend to be performance goal oriented, meaning they want to, the important thing to them is that they are able to succeed at whatever the task is in front of them. And so that leads them to often pick challenges that actually they already know they can meet, rather than challenging themselves. Versus a growth mindset, you're more likely to have a learning goal, right? Your goal is to actually actually get good at something, to actually learn something. And so you'll actually therefore pick increasingly more difficult challenges, and that's and therefore really be able to expand your ability rather than just sort of staying in the zone that's safe, that you know you can perform properly. Another big difference between these two is the attribution of failure. So when you fail, because everybody fails at things all the time, when you fail, somebody who's more fixed mindset is going to react much more emotionally to that in a way that's not helpful. So they might internalize it, just blaming themselves, saying, oh, I'm just not smart enough, I can't do this. Or they'll externalize it and say, oh, this was just, not set up for me to succeed, and it's everybody else's fault that I didn't succeed. And in sort of a blanket way that's not actually helpful for diagnosing how to do better next time. The growth mindset diagnosis of what happened is going to be a little bit more objective and a little bit more useful. And you still might internalize or externalize the failure, but it's going to be sort of a more useful internalization or external attribution. So you might internalize it and say, oh, I just didn't try enough, right? I didn't try hard enough, or the study strategies I tried weren't working and I need to do something differently next time. Or you might say, oh yeah, the course wasn't set up well for me to succeed. I didn't realize that the test was going to be nothing like the problem sets, and that's why I didn't do well on this test, but it doesn't mean that I don't know the material, right? And so your attribution of failure is a little bit more nuanced, and it's a little bit more helpful for figuring out how to move forward. And so, that leads to the next line of strategies, right? So if you're fixed mindset, you are more likely to just give up, or just try the same thing over again that wasn't working the last time and hope it succeeds this time. Whereas if you're growth mindset, you're more likely to say, oh, I didn't study enough, I guess I need to double down on the effort, if that was the reason that you think you didn't succeed. Or you'll try new things, you'll ask for help, you'll find other ways of approaching what you were trying to do and you failed to do. And this is, to me, this is actually the biggest one that I think I was very much raised, I think, in a fixed mindset mentality, and I've really had to push myself a lot to get more towards the growth mindset. And the feedback thing, I think, is the one that I think a lot of us sort of struggle with when we've been in that performance goal, fixed mindset mentality. You actually actively avoid feedback, right? If you're fixed mindset, or if you get feedback and you just don't want to hear it, right? If it's not positive feedback, you don't want to hear it. But when you're growth mindset oriented, you can set aside the ego, right? And you can say, oh, I actually could do better if somebody would give me constructive feedback, if somebody would tell me what I'm doing wrong so I can do it better next time. And so getting our students, I mean, as I said, getting myself to move to this growth mindset, I feel like this has been a challenge of mine that I've been working on basically since I heard about this idea. Luckily for us as instructors, having growth mindsets for our students can actually have a huge effect on our students. So there's a lot of literature that supports that. Actually, maybe more importantly than the students having a growth mindset, the instructor having a growth mindset can really change the learning outcomes for our students. And this is both going to be represented in the way we design activities and also the way we give feedback to our students. So I think, like everybody else, I'm still practicing having a growth mindset and also giving feedback in a way that's growth mindset oriented. I actually have 2 young kids, and it's so natural to me to say, oh, good job, you did it. And I'm constantly catching myself and trying to say, like, oh yeah, you were trying really hard, you're really interested in that, right? Like, trying to give these more growth mindset feedback is something, I'm working on in all aspects of my life. Students and young children, and for myself, right? And for being kind to myself and giving myself positive feedback or growth mindset feedback. All right, so that's my second category. I'm going to talk to you about one more category. So actually, I'm going to give you sort of a model of how learning works. There are a lot of models out there of how learning works. This is very much a model, right? The brain is a very complicated place, but this is sort of one way that I've seen many times, and I sort of have internalized in a way that I think is helpful for helping students think about learning. So, all around us, we are presented by these external stimuli, right? You're listening to the sound of my voice, you're seeing the slides. There's a lot of stuff, maybe there's some interesting smell, maybe it's very hot in your office, you're feeling these different things. All these external stimuli are coming in, and they're going sort of into your sensory memory, which is just extremely fleeting. And so actually what happens from that is that we have to pay attention to certain things that we're sensing, and that goes into our short-term memory. Right, there's so many stimuli that the attention is really what focuses what comes in. And I hope you're focusing on this right now, and not checking your email, checking something else. But so what we pay attention to is what sort of goes into our short-term memory, and it goes in a way that we sort of encode it in some way, right? We're processing what that means, what that sensory memory means, into some way we can understand in our short-term memory. And then a lot of people think about sort of the goal of learning is to really take that from our short-term memory, consolidate it into our long-term memory, right? And the reason that this is important is that our short-term memory is very limited. It can hold something like 5 to 9 items, and that's it. Whereas our long-term memory is essentially unlimited as far as we know. So people think about this as sort of a bottleneck, right? Your short-term memory is kind of a bottleneck to this, big and infinite bottle that can hold a lot more stuff. But there's not a lot that can really be held in your short-term memory. So the more complicated of a task you want to do, the more you want to be able to sort of outsource to your long-term memory, right? So that's sort of the idea of why we want so much in our long-term memory, why we can't just, process everything in our short-term memory right now. But actually this sort of is missing this sort of simple idea of, it goes into our short-term memory, we shove it off to our long-term memory, and then it's there, we have it, right? That's sort of a simplified version that I think this is sort of what a lot of students that I talk to, this is where their understanding of how cognition works sort of ends, right? This is where the cramming comes in, the cramming for the exam the night before. They're like, oh, I just need to get everything from my short-term quickly into my long-term, and that's it, right? But there's actually these 2 other really important processes for learning. So the first is sort of the retrieval part. We actually have to practice retrieving the information at the appropriate point in time from our brain. We actually have to, you have so much stored in your long-term memory. You're not accessing all of that right now. So unless you're very distracted and watching a cat video, you're probably not thinking about everything you know about cats right now, right? But you have a lot of information in your brain stored about that particular topic. And so you're not bringing everything you know to mind at the moment. You have to actually practice retrieval in the appropriate situations. And so this just retrieval practice, bringing things to mind, is a really important practice. And then when you bring it to your mind and you're using it in a new way, you actually reconsolidate that information, right? You make the schemas in your head, you make the sort of the way things are connected in your long-term memory, you make that stronger, you make that more complex and more agile, and you're able, therefore, to do more things with it. So this retrieval reconsolidation cycle is actually extremely important for learning. And this, so this slide I titled How Learning Works. This is more sort of a cognition picture, and my title was metacognition, not cognition. So I think I'd like to sort of start from how something works and then think about what that means for things. So I actually present this slide to my students, and I tell them about this to introduce them to the idea that, there are these practices that you can do that fit into this bigger picture of how learning works, right? So you might think about this sort of short-term memory piece, right? If your short-term memory is limited, if you're staring at a problem and you don't know how to get started and you don't understand it, your short-term memory is probably overwhelmed, right? There's just too many things. It's too complicated. You need to break it down into smaller pieces and try approaching it just a little piece at a time, right? Or this idea, as I was saying, of the retrieval practice and the reconsolidation as being an important piece. Because you have to practice retrieval, there is this idea of retrieval practice of just, not being told the information, not reading the information again, but actually closing the book and just trying to think, trying to remember it on your own, right? Practicing the retrieval. And the reconsolidation part, you can't reconsolidate if you're studying, if you're studying for 2 hours in a block, you're not reconsolidating that. You're not bringing it to mind and letting it be absorbed in new ways. This is why you have to do sort of a spaced practice, right? You want to practice a little today, you want to practice a little tomorrow. And by doing that, you're activating this retrieval reconsolidation cycle over and over again and building up your schema in new and more complex ways. And so these ideas of things like breaking up a problem into smaller pieces, retrieval practice and spaced practice, these are sort of learning strategies that we can talk about with our students. All right, so this is the end of sort of my big picture theory. Should I ask for questions here? Do you want to, or should I move on to the MIT physics part?
They cannot answer because otherwise they will be.
They're all force muted.
So sorry. Yeah, they can. Well, if everyone, it's okay, we can continue. Otherwise, you can write it down in the chat. If you have any question of it, just write it, please. I think everything is very clear.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, this is the easy part, right? This is the theory, right? The hard part is the practice, right? How do we actually do this? All right, so let me actually tell you a little bit about our introductory physics classes, and then I'll tell you some of the specific practices that we do within this. So we at MIT, we have a 2-semester physics requirement for all of our undergraduate students. And so many of them come in placing out of one or both of the semesters. But this does mean that we have somewhere between 600 and 800 students every semester in our classes. We divide them up between something like 7 or 8 sections, so that's not, it's not 800 students in one room. That would be too much for us to deal with. And because they're sort of the introductory classes, and because they're required, a lot of students end up taking them in their first year at MIT. So we actually get to engage with a lot of first-year students who are just getting used to this transition to college, right? They maybe had study strategies in high school of just, looking at the reading the book for the first time the night before the exam, and that was all they needed, right? So they're really learning to become adult learners. They're learning how to succeed in college classes. And this is a big transition point for a lot of them. So we teach in this room that has sort of these, the picture on the left here is a schematic, sort of an overhead schematic of the room. So you can see all these round tables. We have students sit at these round tables. The room holds up to 108 students. And there's no, as you can see, there's no real front of the room. Instead, there are the blue things are sort of screens that come down. We can project slides on those screens. And then the white all around the room is actually a set of whiteboards. So we just have whiteboards all around the room. And students are able to get up to the board and write, work on problems together on those whiteboards. The teaching style that we do in this room is called TEAL. It stands for Technology Enabled Active Learning. That acronym is actually old at this point. So this was developed about 20 years ago by Professor John Belcher at MIT. And I mean, we still use technology, but I don't think that name quite fits exactly what we do anymore. The real force behind this teaching method has been our senior lecturer, Peter Damashkin, who has really shepherded this teaching style over the last 20 years. So this is sort of what we have to start with. We have this wonderful teaching style already sort of at our fingertips. How do we use these ideas of belonging and growth mindset and learning strategies to even further improve the class. So that's sort of where I'm starting here. So the belonging intervention is something I already talked about a little bit at the beginning, but what are some other ways that we've tried to incorporate these ideas even more into what we do? So let me tell you about a few of them. So before classes, this actually is something that started because of the pandemic. We were forced to teach all the way online, and when we came back to in person, we realized there were actually some benefits of this, so we kept going with this. So what students now do before they come to class is they do a series of assignments that we call learning sequences. So it starts with a list of the learning objectives and maybe a video or two, very short, maximum 10-minute videos, and then a short problem, a problem that should take them, 2 to 10 minutes at most, not something very complex, something to basically check their understanding of what they just watched in the previous videos. And then, a few more videos, a few more problems. That's sort of what we think of as a learning of sequence for them. They're very introductory material. This is, sort of a partially flipped class. We still do some talking in class. It's a partially flipped class, just to sort of introduce them to these ideas before they get to class. And I did actually want to take just a second here to, oh, that's not the right place to click, to show you our light board. So the videos that we have, we've made on a light board. This is actually Peter Gramashkin here behind the light board in our studio. And I really, really like this method for making these short videos that we use, because there are a couple of reasons. So one is the camera. I don't know if you can see where my mouse is. The camera is sort of right outside of the screen for the, so this is a piece of glass, and the person writing on the glass is going to look through that glass at the camera. So it looks like they're looking right at you, talking right at the student. And also you can see the sort of the size of that board. It's not very big. So it really does limit our instructors to talking for no more than 10 minutes, which is very nice. They have to plan out what they can say in that one small piece of space. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So yeah, so I'm curious what your impressions are. Again, you can type in the chat. How does this practice that I'm talking about, how does this connect to any of the topics, the belonging, the mindset, learning strategies? In your mind, does this connect to any of the three sort of big topics I talked about at the beginning? All right, well, you're free to also continue to write in the chat. Oh, nice. Oh, nice. All right. Yeah. So I like that, the sort of the fixed mindset, right? That allows them multiple opportunities to try out something in a very low stakes way, right? They're probably going to fail the first time at one or two of these problems, right? And that's, yeah, so it's a place for them to just practice in a very low stakes place. I also think, for me, the big motivation for this was actually sort of the idea of the study strategies, was that, they're learning the terminology outside of class. So now when they get to class, they're not taking up all of that very limited space in their working memory with just what is even the definition of V in this equation, right? They don't have to think about what that definition is. They already are familiar with that enough that hopefully they have some more space in their working memory to sort of put things together more in class. And also sort of the space practice, right? We have these due several times a week. They are forced to engage with this material several times a week. And so, we're not explicitly teaching them maybe that the space practice is helpful, right? But we're forcing them to do the space practice, whether they want to or not. The other place where this sort of learning strategies comes in and is made more explicit is actually this slide again. So this is a slide that in class we have very early in the semester, we have a very low stakes quiz that is its entire purpose is just to sort of alert students to whether or not they are approaching class in the right way. And because a lot of them, you know, as I said, have come in from high school, they remember that they never needed to study for exams. They barely needed to do the homework. You know, they could do the homework an hour before it was due, right? They're still sort of in this mindset of high school, a lot of them. And so it's good to have sort of this quiz really early on to alert them to the fact that, you know, maybe you need to approach this class differently. And some of them don't, right? Some of them they're still breezing through anyway. But for those it does, it's not a very high stakes exam. So it's not like it's going to hurt them. They can still go on and get an A in the class without a problem. But I show this slide in class right after that quiz to sort of alert them, you know, this is something maybe you need to think about how you're approaching your learning, and you know, you can succeed, you can be effective at this, but maybe you need to think about how your learning works. And so you can change your study strategies now. All right, so let me tell you actually about what else we do in class. So here's actually a picture of that classroom. This is my favorite part of class shown in this picture. And actually, again, this is Peter Damashkin right in the middle. So in class now, we have sort of go back and forth between having a sort of passive part where the instructor will talk a little bit, either do a summary or make connections between things. And then the students will do something active. They'll do a concept question where they'll try it themselves. Then they'll talk with their neighbors about it. They'll talk at their tables about it. Or they'll actually get up to the board and do a group problem like this. So the students get up in groups of 3. They try out a problem that's, you know, you can see it on the slides. And very importantly, we have a lot of teaching staff that are walking around and they are helping the students when they get stuck. So this is a great place for students to fail because it's a place where they can get immediate help. They don't have to just be going down the wrong path for a long time by themselves, or, you know, even in a group, but there's a lot of teaching staff there that just help step in and help. It's really important. Students, you know, still, even after we've been doing this for 20 years, still do not like this part of class without a little bit of prodding, right? A lot of people have this feeling that the best way to learn is just to sit and listen to a clean lecture. It feels like it's making so much sense. It feels like, you know, I must be learning so much because this makes so much sense. It's so clear. But, and especially compared to the messy, you know, failing on the board, I don't even know where to start. You know, why is there a negative sign here, right? Of the active learning style. People just feel like they're learning more when they're listening to a nice, easy lecture, right? But actually, we know that students learn a lot more when they are coming up against what the limits of their knowledge are, when they're realizing, oh, I don't know this. This is something I need to learn, right? We know that they learn more in this active learning style. So it's actually really important for us to tell them that over and over again, and to remind them in class over and over that when they're working on the board, that's actually when they're learning the most. And so, all right, so that's sort of a study strategy. Are there other topics? Do you think this part of class relates to sort of belonging or mindset in any way? Again, feel free to put something in the chat. Yeah, I like that. Makes you feel like you're not the only one to struggle with the material. Right, exactly, because you can see other people are struggling too. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they're discussing ideas, so that creates belonging. Exactly, it creates that community. Yep. Yeah, so great. You hit the nail on the head here. So right, I think this is one of the reasons we really value having this group work time so much in class, is that I think it really does add to this sense of belonging, right? They're working in groups, they're getting to know each other, they come to really rely on those people, they form friendships with those people. A lot of them, we've actually heard from many students that, 30 years after well, okay, we haven't been 30 years yet, but like many years after graduating, they still keep in contact with their group members from this class. They have formed such a strong bond with those. Yeah, exactly. They're part of a community. They really feel part of a community doing this. And so this definitely helps with the belonging. We've been doing a lot of studies around belonging, and we do have the data that shows that students feel in class that they're, sometimes they feel like they don't belong because of the words or the actions of other students. And so there is sort of, more that we need to do to sort of figure out how to get interactions between students to be more community oriented for everyone. But this is actually, that was sort of the aim that we took for the belonging intervention. Yeah, so the question of, is there only one teacher teaching, or is, yeah, so there's one in this, I didn't point out everybody, but there's one instructor in this classroom, there's one teaching assistant, there's one person who sort of is there to run demos and also help out with the problems. And then we usually have, in a class of 100, we usually have something like 6 to 8 undergraduate students as well. And those are undergraduate TAs. So those people have recently taken the class and are very familiar with it. And we give them solutions ahead of time, so they don't have to have known the solution by themselves. But it's really nice to have that whole array of teaching staff too, because the students usually feel more, the near peers, the teaching assistants who are undergraduates, feel much more approachable to them than asking the professor for help. And so it's really nice to have that whole array of expertise and teachers in the room helping out. All right, yeah, and then, right, as you said, the growth mindset also, that's another way this comes in, especially when the instructor frames this the right way before you start a problem, reminding people that this is the place to fail, this is the place to make the mistakes, because that's how you learn. If you're not failing at something, you're not learning. And so sort of framing that, reminding students periodically like that, and then when somebody does make a mistake, to be very kind and supportive about that, you can really build that growth mindset in your students. All right, so I have one last sort of piece that I wanted to talk about of how we've sort of implemented that. This is actually separate from our class. So there's now a mentor program that we have within the physics department. This was actually started, like many things, in spring of 2020, when we sent all of our students home. This was started by Professor Ed Berchinger in the physics department. And the idea behind this mentor program is that it pairs basically older undergraduates or graduate students or even postdocs or faculty and staff with students who are in their first and second year courses. And they are expected to meet weekly one-on-one with their mentees. So the mentor and the mentee set up a meeting to meet one-on-one. And the sort of first topics of conversation are about, the physics. It's somebody that you're forming a personal relationship with to ask physics questions of. But almost all of these relationships usually blossom out and start talking about, how to get a an undergrad research opportunity, or what major they should be, or, what's grad school like? Should I apply to grad school? And these relationships really bloom into something that's more than just sort of a tutor kind of relationship. And that's very much intentional. So actually one of Ed's main goals in starting this program was to actually influence the culture of the physics department. He wanted to sort of build this more inclusive community, this more supportive community. And actually the feedback that we get is that the mentors, more than the mentees, the mentors actually feel very strongly like they're part of a community. And they feel much more that the sense of identity of a physicist participating in this community. And so I think, the program may have worked better for the mentors than the mentees, but the mentees give it very positive reviews as well. And so there, for the mentors, there's the sense of belonging, but actually the piece of this that I want to bring back to our introductory physics students is actually the growth mindset piece, because we have now developed a very small class that goes along with the mentor program. So mentors are required to take this, you know, it's like a quarter of a normal class. It's a very, very light class that goes along with it, that talks about a lot of these ideas that I've been talking about today. And in particular, we talk about growth mindset very early on, and we actually practice giving growth mindset feedback to students. And so our mentors are very aware of sort of the importance of the growth mindset, and they get opportunities to practice with us and then with their mentees, giving that sort of more growth mindset feedback to their mentees. All right, so I think I am at about 45 minutes. I'm gonna put up a summary slide. So this is sort of just, you know, the three big topics that I talked about: belonging, growth mindset, and metacognition or learning strategies. And my sort of pairing, I mean, a lot of them belong in a lot of different categories of the different things that I talked about. So our belonging intervention and group working class really add to the sense of belonging. Growth mindset was the mentor program that I just mentioned, and the framing of the working class, that this is the right place to fail. And metacognition was just, you know, the structure of our course was designed to support the ideas that we understand of metacognition, but then we also try to support students learning the idea of metacognition after, you know, in one-on-one discussions, but also in our class discussion after the low stakes quiz. So thank you all for listening to me. I feel very strange having taught in this model so long, where I never talk for this long. It does feel very strange to talk at you for so long. And thank you all for listening. And I would love to have some discussion and questions here.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I think we can stop the recording.